The broken cage the hallway was dark and smelled like burned wires. Captain Yalin moved carefully, his boots pressing softly on the metal floor. His team followed close behind, their weapons ready, eyes scanning every corner. This station had been abandoned for years, lost in a forgotten part of space. Yet the distress signal had been fresh just 48 hours ago. Someone had called for help. Move slow, Yalin whispered, his voice calm but sharp. The salvage crew passed broken doors, flickering lights, and strange claw marks on the walls. There were signs of life, but no bodies, no answers. Just before the hallway ended, a soft sound reached them like a weak whimper, almost like a cry. Yalin raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. He stepped closer to the noise, his flashlight revealing a large storage room ahead. Metal crates were scattered everywhere, and at the back, half buried in junk, was a small cage. It was rusted, half open, but inside was someone or something curled up tightly. Yalin stepped closer, and the beam of light fell on her face. A girl, clearly alien, with pale violet skin and tangled silver hair. She looked up slowly, her large eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Filled with fear and exhaustion, her wrists were chained, a thin metal collar around her neck, and her body trembled like a leaf. "Is she alive?" one of the crew asked, aiming a scanner toward her. Yalin knelt and gently touched the bars of the cage. The girl flinched, her body pressing against the back wall. Her hands raised to protect her head, but she didn't scream, she didn't beg, she just looked at him, eyes full of silent pleading. "She's alive," Yalin said softly. "But she's been through hell," the scanner confirmed it, heartbeat low. Dehydration, signs of old wounds, and malnourishment. There was a brand on her shoulder, cruelly burned into her skin. The symbol was known used by traffickers, slavers, those who kept beings not as people. "She's a pleasure pet," whispered the medic, his voice shaking. "From the Royal Black Market circuits, they sell girls like her to nobles for war. Entertainment." The crew grew silent. Some turned away in disgust. Others looked at her with pity. But Yalin didn't move. He just looked into her eyes. She had said nothing, not even a word, but he could feel it. She didn't want to be left behind. "She's not staying here," Yalin said at last, standing up. One of the soldiers stepped forward. "Sir, this could be a violation of LIF. She's marked property. Taking her could get us flagged." Jalen's jaw tightened. "And leaving her here to die would make us better." No one had an answer, just silence. The girl reached forward, her chained hand brushing against Jalen's glove. She didn't pull or hold tight, she just touched it gently, like she was testing if he was real. In that moment, Yala made a decision, one that would change both of their lives. He reached into the cage, unhooked the chain, and lifted her carefully into his arms. She was light, far too light, and her body shivered as she leaned against him. "I don't know your name," he said quietly, "but you're coming with me." She didn't speak, but a tear slipped down her cheek. It wasn't from pain, it was something else, maybe the first feeling of safety in years. Back on the ship, the crew made space for her in the medical bay. She was given a soft blanket, clean water, and food, but she only took small sips. Yalin stayed with her, sitting nearby, not asking questions, not pushing her to talk. She watched him with those same big eyes, unsure if this kindness was real. Days passed, and the ship moved through uncharted space. Each night, she grew less afraid, sleeping more, eating more, still silent. The crew started calling her the quiet girl, though Yolan waited for her real name. Then, one night, when everyone was asleep, she stood beside Jalen's bunk and whispered a word. "Kara," she said, her voice barely louder than the wind. Yolen opened his eyes and looked at her. "Is that your name?" She nodded once, then sat on the floor beside him, her head resting against the wall. She didn't ask for anything. She just wanted to be close. He didn't send her away. He let her stay, because in that moment, Yalan knew the truth. He hadn't rescued her from that cage. She had rescued him from walking away. Asterisk healing isn't just physicalcra, did not speak much in the first few days. She moved quietly, almost invisible, always watching with wide, silent eyes. She wore soft clothes now, but still flinched when someone raised their hand too quickly. Yalan noticed she always kept her back to the wall. Her steps light, like she was trained to never be heard. She avoided the mirrors. Every time she saw her reflection, she turned away quickly, covering the collar on her neck. The crew tried to talk to her, but she only responded with small nods or lowered eyes. To them, she was a mystery, but to Yalan, she was a scarred soul, learning how to breathe again. One morning, Yalan found her crouched in the ship's garden bay. The artificial light bathed her in gold as she touched a tiny blue flower with trembling fingers. She's never seen one before, the engineer whispered from behind, not even something as simple as a flower. Kara didn't know beauty belonged to her too, not just the ones who owned her. That evening, Kara quietly entered the ship's dining room. The crew froze. Unsure how to act, she had always eaten alone in her room. She walked slowly to the table and sat beside Yalan, not speaking, not demanding. Just being there, Yalan passed her a bowl of soup, and she took it with both hands like it was sacred. The room stayed silent for a while. Then someone cracked a joke about the captain's cooking. Kara didn't laugh, but her lips moved just a little curve, almost a smile. It felt like sunlight had broken through a storm for Yalan. That one half smile meant more than any victory he'd ever won in battle. Later that night, Kara stood outside Jalen's room, her hands shaking as she knocked. He opened the door and found her holding a small blanket, barefoot, eyes down. "I'm not here for that," she whispered. "I just can't sleep alone." Yalan stepped aside, letting her in without a word. She didn't climb into his bed. She curled up on the floor beside it, like a scared animal finding warmth in someone else's shadow. Yalan covered her with a second blanket and sat near her, resting his back against the wall. He didn't ask questions. He just stayed awake until her breathing slowed, until the fear faded. The next day, Kara followed him around the ship, not like a pet, but like someone afraid to be left behind. She watched him fix panels, laughed quietly when he cursed at a stubborn fuse. He began showing her how systems worked, how wires connected, how doors responded to code. She listened with the hunger of someone who had never been taught anything but obedience. One afternoon, Kara found an old music player. She pressed buttons until something soft and slow played. She sat in the corner of the room and listened for hours, her fingers tapping to the rhythm. Yalan passed by once, saw her swaying gently with her eyes closed, and didn't say a word. He knew she was building something inside herself, something that looked like peace, felt like safety, even if just for a moment. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe she wasn't property anymore. She was a person, with a name, with thoughts, with music in her soul. That night, Yalan sat beside her in the observation dome. Stars moved silently across the sky window as Kara rested her head on his shoulder. "I never knew stars could be real," she said, barely louder than a breath. Yalan turned to her, surprised. "You've never seen them before?" "I saw them through glass," she replied, "but they weren't mine to look at." Now she watched them with no collar pulling her down, no hands forcing her away, only her and the stars. And the one human who never tried to own her. For the first time, Kara didn't feel like a survivor. She felt alive, and in that quiet space, where no one judged her scars, she began to heal not just her body, but the invisible pieces that had been shattered long ago. Yalan didn't need her to speak much, because in her silence, he heard everything that mattered. "The owner wants her back." That calm did not last long. Kara had started to smile, walk without fear, and sleep without nightmares. But peace is a fragile thing when the galaxy believes someone still owns you. One morning, the ship's AI pinged. Yalin with a flashing red alert tracking beacon activated. Yalin rushed to the control room, eyes scanning data streams. A hidden implant inside Kara's body had come alive, broadcasting her position to the galaxy. She was marked, the medic confirmed, deep under her skin, behind the shoulder blade. It wasn't just a signal, it was a call, and someone out there had answered. Kara stood at the doorway, silent, her eyes already full of guilt. She had heard everything. "I'll leave," she said. Barely a whisper, "before they come for me." Yalin turned sharply. "You're not going anywhere." But Kara had already started packing. No tears, no shaking, just quiet determination. Like she had done this before, she folded the clothes Yulan had given her, placed the music player gently on the bed. Each item felt like a goodbye, and it burned something inside her chest. Yulan found her near the shuttle dock, holding a small bag. He grabbed it and threw it aside. "You think? I saved you just to let them take you again." Kara's voice cracked. "If they come, people will die because of me." "I'll die for you," Yalin said, "but I will not let you walk out of your life again." She dropped to her knees, hands covering her face, the dam finally breaking. For the first time since he met her, Kara cried. Not from pain, but from being wanted. Yalin knelt beside her and held her as her body trembled. He didn't tell her it was okay. Because it wasn't, but she wasn't alone anymore. Back in engineering, the crew worked to disable the beacon. They burned out circuits, fried power cells. But the signal wouldn't stop. "It's layered tech," the mechanic muttered. "Her former master must really want her back, or wants to make an example of anyone who takes what's his." Yalin growled. They changed course, jumped through unstable wormholes, used asteroid fields as cover, but the bounty had already spread. Kara's face now floated. On every black market station, a reward was listed in 5 currencies, along with one message: return the property alive, broken if necessary. Kara read it in silence, her fingers tightening around the edge of the datapad. "Is that all?" "I was." She asked softly. "Property?" Yalin looked at her. "To them? Maybe. But to me? You are a life worth fighting for. You are not property, Kara. You are a person, and you are staying free." The crew voted that night. Some were scared, some angry. Others worried about their families. Yalin stood in front of them all, hands clenched, voice low. "No one's forcing you to stay, but if you stand with me, you protect what's right, not what's easy." One by one, the crew nodded. They didn't do it for money or for orders. They did it because of how Kara looked when she touched a flower, because she had learned to laugh again. And none of them could stomach the idea of her back in chains. They shut off outside comms, reworked the ship's ID signature, and erased Kara's biometric data. The beacon still pulsed quietly under her skin, like a cursed heartbeat. But now, she was surrounded by a crew that called her Kara, not Pet. And she was protected by a man who would rather burn the stars than let her be taken. That night, Kara sat alone in the ship's garden bay. She looked up at the stars and whispered something old in her forgotten language. Yalin stood nearby, not wanting to interrupt. She turned and said softly, "I don't want to run anymore." "Then we don't run," Yalin replied. "We make them chase. And we make them regret it." Kara looked down at her hands, once trained to serve, now clenched into fists. She wasn't the same broken girl in the cage anymore, and if her owner came for her, he'd find something waiting that wasn't afraid anymore. The master arrives, the stars blinked with warning. A massive vessel tore through subspace like a blade through silk. It bore black markings, the kind used by slavers who didn't care about law. and at its helm was a face Kara knew too well, the one who had once smiled while placing the collar. Around her neck, the crew watched from the bridge as the slaver ship locked onto their signal. Its weapons were armed, shields glowing red. Its intent clear. This intent clear. They came fast, the pilot muttered, sweat gathering at his brow. They've been tracking her longer than we thought, Yalan replied coldly. Kara stood behind the control panel, eyes fixed on the ship that had haunted her dreams. She didn't speak, but her knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the console. Inside her, the weight of her past crashed against the fire of who she was becoming. She turned to Yalan and said, "Let me help fight." He paused, surprised. "You sure?" She nodded once. "This ends now." Yalan handed her a pulse pistol, but she refused it. "I don't need that," she said. "Just give me access to the defense systems." The slaver's voice boomed across the comm, oily and full of arrogance. "You have something that belongs to me," he growled. "Return it, and I may let you live." Yolan leaned in, voice calm but ice cold. "She doesn't belong to anyone." A sudden barrage lit up the void. The enemy ship opened fire without waiting for a reply, its blasts shaking the freighter. Alarms rang, systems flickered, and crew members scrambled into positions. Kara stood in the center of the chaos, focused, calm, and ready. She had studied the ship during her weeks in hiding. She knew which systems were weak, which shields failed under pressure. With swift hands, she rerouted power, sealed hatches, and activated auto turrets hidden in the ship's underbelly. Her voice echoed through the speakers as she issued commands to the crew. "She's running our defense grid," the pilot whispered in awe. "She's more than we thought," the mechanic added. "She's not what they made her," Yalan said firmly, watching Kara lead. Another blast rocked the ship, sparks flew, and Yalan fell hard, blood trailing down his forehead. Kara rushed to him, grabbing a med pack without hesitation, her hands moving fast and steady. "You're hurt," she said, voice shaking, but her actions, sure. "Just a scratch," he replied with a wince. "Don't stop, keep them off us." Kara returned to the console, her eyes burning with fury. She rerouted energy from life support to boost shields. Risky, but it worked. Then, with one last override, she unleashed a full salvo of ion torpedoes directly into the slaver's engines. The explosion lit up the stars, the enemy vessels spiraling out of control. Smoke filled the freighter's bridge, and silence followed. Then came a cheer from the crew. Exhausted but alive, Kara leaned back in her chair, her arms trembling, not from fear, but from the storm she had just survived. And outside the viewport, the slaver's ship burned like the past being erased. Emergency lights cast a soft red glow across the ship. Yalan opened his eyes slowly from where he lay, the blood drying on his skin. Kara sat beside him, wiping his forehead, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you I'd help. You did more than help," Yolan said, smiling weakly. "You saved us." She looked at her hands, once chained, now covered in grease and grit from battle. "I didn't know I could be this," she said quietly. "I didn't know I was allowed to fight for myself." "You always were," Yolan replied. "You just needed someone to remind you." Kara held his hand and squeezed it gently. The ship floated quietly now, but everything had changed. For the first time in her life, Kara had faced her captor and made him run. Wanted by the galaxy, they won the battle, but not the war. A slaver's ship exploding in deep space doesn't stay quiet for long. Within hours, bounty boards across 5 sectors flashed red with their names, one for Yulan marked as a trafficker killer, and one for Kara still labeled stolen property. The galaxy didn't care about the truth. It didn't care that Kara was a person, not a pet, to the powerful. Her rebellion was dangerous not because she escaped, but because she fought back. Now they wanted her silenced, and anyone who helped her would be hunted too. The crew landed on a quiet jungle moon deep in fringe space. There were no cities, no law enforcement, just moss-covered ruins and thick forests. They repaired the ship in silence while Kara and Yalan stayed hidden inside a camouflaged shelter. But even peace among trees felt like a countdown ticking. In the background, villagers came from nearby settlements to trade berries and herbs. They looked at Kara with curiosity, not fear, not disgust. One elderly woman even touched her silver hair and smiled. "Moon-blessed," she whispered. For a few days, Kara let herself pretend this life could last. Children followed her around the village paths. They asked about her voice, her clothes, her strange violet skin. Kara laughed softly as they tried to braid flowers into her hair, and Yolan watched. From a distance, wondering how someone once treated like a tool could bring so much life to others. But their peace cracked when a traveling merchant arrived with a dusty hollow pad. He placed it on a table and said, "Big price on this girl's head. Some say she took down a royal ship." Kara stepped back instinctively, and Jalen's hand moved toward his weapon. The merchant only laughed. "I'm not turning her in. Just figured you should know what's coming." The bounty had grown 10 million credits alive, 5 million dead. Kara wasn't just a runaway anymore. She was a symbol across the outer colonies. Whispers had started of a girl once caged, now fighting back. And the empires didn't like symbols they couldn't control. They left the village that night. Not with fear, but with purpose. Yolan gave the elder a satchel of supplies, and Kara left the children a wooden carving of a bird she made herself. "No goodbye?" Yalan asked as they climbed aboard the ship. Kara shook her head. "I don't want to leave a trail of tears behind me." Back on the freighter, Kara trained daily learning systems, weapons, tactics. She refused to be helpless again. Refused to be a reason others suffered. Yalan sparred with her gently, correcting her grip, showing her how to read enemy movement. She learned fast not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted to protect those who gave her freedom. Sometimes, she woke up from dreams, sweating, gasping, her body shaking. Yalan never asked what they were about. He just stayed with her until she calmed down. She once whispered, "I used to beg in those dreams." Now, she said, "I fight in them." Yolin installed a new implant under her skin, one that jammed all trackers and ID scans. "You're off-grid now," he said. "They won't find you by signal again." Kara smiled faintly, then leaned forward and kissed his cheek without a word. It was soft, shy, but full of something growing, something dangerous to those who once owned her. In time, rumors began to change, not just of Kara the stolen pet, but Kara the fighter. Kara the ghost who burned slaver fleets. People on mining worlds started painting her symbol on their walls, broken collar in flames. Yalan knew what that meant, and so did Kara. They weren't just running anymore. They were becoming something bigger, a threat to the old way, and a hope for the ones still living in cages. Asterisk freedom isn't given. It's taken. The galaxy whispered her name now, not in fear, but in curiosity, in defiance, in quiet rebellion. Kara's image had spread through slaver networks like wildfire. Not as a missing pet, but as a warning in one sector. Slaves etched her name into walls with sharp rocks. In another, captured workers hummed a coded tune, Kara's escape signal. Yalan saw the stories every time they docked, and each time, he saw her standing a little taller. They hid on a mining moon where rock dust clouded the skies for weeks. It was meant to be a quick refuel, a quiet stop. But trouble arrived before they could finish repairs. A bounty hunter in obsidian armor walked into the outpost bar, holding Kara's picture. "I want her." The hunter growled, voice filtered through a helmet. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer deals. He simply announced the reward. Placed a tracker on the table and promised double for anyone who turned her in personally. Kara was in the ship when it happened. Yalin returned with clenched fists, blood on his knuckles and a quiet rage in his eyes. "They're done talking," he said. "He's coming, and he won't stop." Kara didn't run. She went to the weapons locker and opened it herself. She wore light armor this time, fitted to her shape, no longer draped in slave silks. Her hair was tied back, her eyes sharper than ever. She didn't ask for permission to fight, she only said. "He comes for me. He answers to me." When the bounty hunter breached their ship, Kara was waiting. She stepped into view slowly, deliberately, and said his name. His head tilted. He remembered her, but not like this. Not like someone unchained, unafraid, unbreakable. He struck fast, but Kara moved faster. She used the ship's corridors like a trap, drawing him into tight corners and sealed hatches. Every step she took was a memory turned into strength, every blow a scar she'd refused to let define her. Yalin watched from security feeds, pride burning in his chest. She didn't kill the hunter, she disarmed him, pinned him, and pulled off his helmet. He gasped at the light on her face, the fire in her eyes. "You were never supposed to fight," he whispered. "I wasn't supposed to live either," she said. Then let him go. She pressed a tracker beacon into his hand. One she rewired to spread her message across all slave networks. "Tell them Kara is not for sale," she said. "Tell them I'm not alone." Then she walked away without looking back. The hunter limped off the ship in silence. He never raised his weapon again, not because he was beaten, but because he had seen something that made him question everything. A former slave who looked him in the eye and chose mercy over revenge. A girl who was never given freedom but took it anyway. The next morning, the crew gathered around Kara. They didn't clap or cheer. They just stood with her, shoulder to shoulder. They had watched her transformation piece by piece, and now they didn't see a rescued victim, they saw a leader. Yalin placed a new badge on her jacket. Not a rank, not a reward, just a symbol of their ship. Their crew, their unity. "You don't follow me anymore," he said softly. "You walk beside me now." Kara touched the badge with shaking fingers. It wasn't made of gold or crystal, but it was heavier than any chain she'd ever worn. For once, her tears weren't from sorrow or fear. They were from power, from choice, from the strength she had forged with her own hands. Home is a person. The stars had stopped chasing them for the first time in cycles. There was no alert, no pursuit, no fear humming beneath the floor. Kara stood on the deck of the freighter, staring at the world below, a green moon covered in lakes and wind. "This feels quiet," she whispered, unsure if peace could ever be real. Yalin stepped beside her, arms folded, watching her expression. "We can build here," he said. "No one comes this deep anymore." Kara didn't respond at first, just kept looking at the clouds swirling over the water. Then she nodded once, her voice soft. "Let's grow something of our own." They built a small home using ship parts and local stone. Nothing fancy, but warm, filled with light, filled with laughter that had once been impossible. Kara carved symbols into the door, a broken chain wrapped around a flame. Not for decoration, but as a promise to herself. The locals never asked about her past. They simply called her the Star Woman who smiles. She taught their children how to read stars, how to fix circuits, how to say no with strength. Yalin fixed machinery, built gardens, and watched her become someone new every day. One night, Kara sat on the grass, stars glittering above her. Her head rested against Jalen's shoulder, her fingers tracing the old scar on his arm. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you left me in that cage?" she asked. Yalin turned to her and said, "No. Because I would have never forgiven myself." She looked up at him, eyes wet but calm. "You didn't just pull me out of a cage," she said. "You stayed while I figured out who I was." Yalin touched her hand gently. "I didn't save you, Kara. You saved yourself." I just refused to look away. In her room, Kara kept two things on a shelf apiece of her old collar, and Jalen's cracked dog tag. She had fused them together into a heart-shaped locket. Not for romance, but for truth. One piece represented her pain, the other her hope, and together they told the story of who she had become. They never married, never needed to. What they had was beyond names or contracts. It was trust built through battle, healing stitched through quiet nights, and love that never needed to be spoken aloud. Years passed, and Kara's legend faded from bounty boards but grew in quiet circles. Slaves whispered of the violet girl who became a fire. Her name became a password, her story a map for others trying to escape. She didn't chase attention, she chased peace, and found it where no one looked. One day, a young alien girl arrived at their doorstep, alone and afraid. Kara opened the door, recognized the same terror she once wore. She didn't ask where the girl came from or who had hurt her. She just held out her hand and said, "You're safe now, you're home." Yalin watched from behind. Smiling faintly, Kara stood tall, calm, her shadow stretching across the doorway like a shield. She had once been a caged girl with no name. Now she was the shelter, the voice, the hope for others lost in the dark. And in that quiet moonlit house, far from war, far from chains, far from fear, Kara found what no slaver could sell and no bounty could buy. A place where no one owned her. No one controlled her, because she had learned one truth: home was never a cage. Home was a person who stayed.